Hey, Oso Creek. My name is Nate Rubright. I'm one of the missionaries that is supported by the church. I live in Boston and I work at a hospitality ministry called Bread. That's an open coffee house for students of the Somerville area. I recently wrote an article about ministry in the time of our pandemic, and I'd like to share it with you. So, on a Tuesday night last month, I was making soup. We have an event where we cook a meal for a local shelter and serve dinner to all the volunteers. Usually, we have a mix of students and community members attend. I looked across the table at a group of students chopping onions. Earlier, there was apprehension about maybe this new coronavirus would affect long-awaited spring break plans. At this point, nothing had been determined about what would happen with the schools. A couple community folks joked about how great it would be to work from home and avoid the tea. Before we even finished the onions, one of the students looked up from their phone and let out a quick, nervous laugh. He then announced to the rest of the room that campus would be closed for the rest of the semester. Now, there's a lot of temptation in ministry to think programmatically. Throughout the week, I build community through fun, service, food, discussion, or some combination of all those. I take a lot of pride in creating safe, engaging spaces where conversations can happen naturally, and I look forward to the challenge of tweaking what we do to keep it fresh or relevant. And needless to say, a lot has changed about how we can do ministry now. The problem with programmatic thinking is that it reduces faith formation to a series of weekly events. Ideally, conversations and spiritual formation flow out of our programming, but at times I find myself defining the success of our ministry by how well I execute each gathering. When I learned about the limitations the pandemic would necessitate, I saw it as an opportunity to shoehorn our week into the virtual space. After all, our students seemed to like what we do, and I assumed they wanted us to continue to execute despite all of our challenges. So with our current week as a template, I moved towards everything being in a virtual chat room. A month ago, I would spend half an hour before events excitedly getting ready and praying for what God had in store. But after 2 weeks of meeting online, I find myself now spending that time listlessly scrolling through my news feed before emailing out a meeting link. For the students, the novelty and quirkiness of virtual meetings soon wore off, and eventually it seemed that the community was logging in out of obligation instead of purposefulness. All the time I would spend making meals, setting up, or determining logistics was now spent curating an online presence and counting views. Working in ministry during this pandemic has started to seem more like operating a social media content farm than leading any kind of spiritual formation. And see, I tacitly take pride in the fact that our ministry is offline. Before this spring, all of our events were created to provide a human hospitality element that was lacking in our progressively online environment. We made meals from scratch. We looked at each other in the eyes. We held hands when we prayed. Now the ministry practice has changed, and with that, it seems I've become wayward in my purpose. I can no longer grade myself on the success or failure of our events because I have no idea what success looks like in this virtual space. I have no baseline. I started wondering, since this pandemic took our programs, does that mean it took the ministry too? I feel now that I have to resist the temptation of the path of least resistance. The rest of the world started moving to virtual spaces, but does that mean ministries have to follow? The large events have been canceled indefinitely, but what about the individual conversation? Faith formation is a slow, subjective journey. We now have been provided space to explore that journey with time we may never have had. Our weekly slate of programs has been upended, and no matter the tweaking, meeting online will never replicate what can be done in person. But we now have the option to move slowly. We can spend time on the phone hashing out questions and following rabbit holes. We can abandon the race to build great events and return faith formation to what it once was for me. Not a model of programmed events, but a conversation between two people exploring faith together. Thanks for listening. Hope to talk to you soon. What do you think? Was that good?